Hi, and welcome to this tutorial where I will show you how to start the engines on the 10-year anniversary edition of our free E-Jets for X-Plane 12. And if you haven't downloaded these free E-Jets yet, you can do it right now by going to xcrafts.com/free-ejets. So right now we're in Bergamo, which is the departure airport of our demo flight. And in this video, I will show you how to power up the plane from cold and dark and how to start the engines. And if you want to learn how to complete the whole flight from start to finish, including how to use the FMS or the autopilot, you should check out our full demo flight video. And by the way, this startup procedure will be the same for either the E175 or the E195. I'm also using this Simple Ground Service plugin, which you can download for free by Googling X-Plane Simple Ground Service. This plugin is not part of our free E-Jets download. So let me first show you how to operate the doors and how to operate the ground objects. So if you move your mouse to the left side of the screen, you will find these tabs that give you access to different functions and plugins. If we click on menu, you will have the menu where you can control all the doors. So if I want to close the front passenger door or any door, just simply click on the arrows. And the Simple Ground Services also understands these commands, so it will automatically remove the vehicles. I can also toggle the ground equipment, which are the cones and the remove before flight tags. And we also have a pushback plugin. However, it was developed for X-Plane 11, and due to some changes in X-Plane 12, the pushback truck is not visible in X-Plane 12 anymore. The plugin will still push the plane back, however, you will not see the truck. So I recommend using the free and more intuitive, better pushback plugin for X-Plane 12. Alright, so let's go right into the cockpit. So in the real E-Jets or in our paid E-Jets, when you come into the cockpit, the first thing you would do is verify that all the switches are in the correct position and that all the levers are in the stowed or idle position. However, our free E-Jets do not have most of the custom systems and the automation which will configure the airplane correctly for the cold and dark state. The difference is that all the switches on the overhead panel would normally be in the 12 o'clock position, except for the batteries, the APU, and the electric pump A, which is not even labeled here. And also, some of these panels are not represented correctly, as they would be in the real plane or in our paid E-Jets. For example, the pressurization panel would not have this section, the air conditioning and pneumatic panel would not even have this switch here. So these free E-Jets are a very simplified version of the E-Jets. And if you would like to experience truly authentic E-Jets with the correct cockpit, configuration, and many implemented systems that simulate the automatic behavior, you can explore our paid E-Jets family. So the next thing I will do is verify that all the levers are in the correct stowed or idle position. So the flaps 0, throttles are on idle, speed brakes are in the 0 position or the closed position, the parking brake is set. And we are checking this so that when we power up the airplane will not start into action and it will not start doing things. So that is why this step is important. So now we can go ahead and turn on the batteries. The battery switches are right here on the electric panel. So we'll do battery 2 and battery 1. And you will now hear the caution warning. And you will also see that some of the avionics screens are on, as well as some of the buttons. Now, the batteries provide DC power to the plane, but the batteries are not strong enough to provide enough power for all the systems to load. And that is why you only see some of the screens load. So that would be the left MFD, the ICAS, where the engines indications are, the right FMS, the standby display, and the clock. In order to power up all the systems and avionics, we need to provide a more powerful electric source. We can do that either with the ground power unit. So we can go to the menu, click ground power unit. And now if I look outside, you will see that the ground power unit is now connected to the plane and it is providing electrical power. However, the plane is not using the electric power yet because we need to enable it first. So we will need to click on the GPU power, which says available, and then if you click it, it will say in use. And we can now see that all the screens are loaded, and we can also hear the avionics fans starting. We can also increase the brightness now of all the screens so that we can see them better. Okay, so that was the GPU. And the second option for providing the power to the avionics is using the APU, which is the auxiliary power unit. And it is a third jet engine, which is located in the back of the fuselage right there. So I'm gonna go ahead and disconnect the GPU now. So I'm gonna press this button. We can see we're back to DC power, only two of the big screens. And I can disconnect the ground power unit. And to turn on the APU, we will have a look at the APU control panel, and we'll turn the APU switch to on, and after 3 seconds to start, and then let go. And you will now see right here that the APU is spooling up. Once it reaches around 100%, it will power up enough power for all the systems to load fully. So let's wait for that. Alright, we can see that the left FMS already loaded. There's the right MFD. And now the PFDs are loaded as well. Now on the real planes or in our paid E-jets, this moment is beautiful because it pretty much looks like when you turn on the Christmas tree for the first time. All the instruments and all the screens are coming up at different times, and it's really cool. But these free E-jets only have a simplified version of that. Alright, well now we have the APU running, and we can go ahead and look at the cockpit configuration. So as I said, with the paid E-jets or the real E-jets, when you come into the plane, all the switches would be configured correctly. However, on the free E-jets, we don't have all the custom systems, so you will need to make sure that all the switches are set up in the correct 12 o'clock position. So we can turn on the AC generators. APU generator needs to be on. Also, this is a good moment to mention that the Embraer uses a dark and quiet cockpit philosophy. And that means that if a switch is dark or quiet, it means it is working correctly or it is on. If something is illuminated or if it is making any noises, it means something is wrong or something is off. So all of these switches right here right now are off because they have a white stripe over them. So we need to click on them to turn all of those systems on. Again, you would not do this on the paid E-jets because they would all have that set up correctly. We'll also turn this switch to both, which would not be there on the real E-jets or the paid E-jets. Alright, 12 o'clock everything. We'll turn everything to auto. Generally, just make sure that all switches are in the 12 o'clock position or the on or auto position. Alright. Windshield wipers, well, those definitely don't need to be in the 12 o'clock position because it is not raining. We'll turn the nav lights on, which will signal to the ground crew that we have powered up the airplane. And before we start the engines, we'll also turn the red beacon light on. So we'll turn the engine pumps on, anti-ice. And that is it. All right. Now on the real plane, you would also perform the fire test before turning on the APU, which would be done by pressing the test button. This would illuminate the fire extinguisher handles, and on the iCast you would have different kinds of messages which would be required to verify that the airplane is operating correctly. However, these free E-jets do not have those messages. Alright, so next we are going to make sure that all the doors are closed. So we'll have a look at our menu. All the doors are closed. We can also verify that on the MFD and iCast. On the iCast you have this red warning, which actually should be on the MFD. And on the MFD also see a little indication of which door is open. So I'm going to close this, make sure all the doors are closed. And now we are ready to start the engines. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn the red light beacon on. Park brake is set, so that when we start the engines, the plane will not start moving forward. And we can go ahead and look at the starter switches. So if we look here, the ignition switches should be to auto. Again, on the paid E-jets, it would already be that way. And now we will just turn on each one of the starter switches, starting with engine number 2. We will turn it and hold it in the start position for around 5 seconds until we see the fuel flow being introduced on the ICAS. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, we can see the fuel flow being introduced, and we can also see the N2 rising as well as N1. So we are gonna wait for the engine to spool up. Now, the engine start on the free E-jet is really not representative of the real startup. We did not pay much attention to all of these parameters being correct. They're just slowly starting up. However, in our paid E-jets, we paid close attention to making sure that all these parameters are rising at a specific rate and to specific numbers, so that we get a much better representation of what the engine startup would be like on the real E-jets. Alright, and we can have a look outside to verify that the engine number 2 is already spinning, which it is. Perfect. And now we can turn on engine number 1. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And there we go. We can see the fuel flow rate being visible, which means that we can now let go. And that is it. We will now just have to wait for the engine to start. And we can also hear engine number 1 spooling up. And the last thing we will do once the engines are fully spooled up is to turn off the APU, because we no longer need it. We now have the engines that are providing the electrical power to the plane and to all the systems, so we can go ahead and turn off the APU by turning the APU switch to stop. And if we look at the ICAS, we can see that the temperature is going down, so the APU first needs to cool down before spooling down all the way. Now, this process would normally be accompanied by some messages on the ICAS, however, the free E-jets do not have that implemented. And there we go, we can see the APU is spooling down, which also took a lot quicker than on a real plane. However, at least we have a simple cooldown sequence implemented. And that's it. So this is how you would power up the plane and start the engines. And as the next step, you should watch our full demo flight, where I will show you how to complete a full flight from start to finish, including how to program the FMS or how to use the autopilot modes. Watching the demo flight will ensure that you have fun with these free E-jets and that you will not get frustrated if something will not work as expected. See you in the next video!